My name's Daisy, and I'm going to be facilitating this conversation. We've got about half an hour, and if things go really well, it might go a bit longer. So please do stick around for the duration of the conversation. So like I said, my name's Daisy. I'm a facilitator, and basically I'm a mate of these guys, and they really wanted this to feel like a conversation amongst friends. So they thought, we should just ask a friend, which is why I'm here. But we've also had a chat about what might be interesting for you all to hear, and also what these folks want to talk about the show. So we're going to talk about the process a bit, we're going to talk a bit more about the story, and there's going to be a chance for you to ask some questions as well. But first I'm going to introduce the folks that you can see sitting here. And I'm going to read it so I don't get it wrong. But so Dirty Hare, the theatre company who made Gunter that you just saw, was established as a theatre company under the name Dirty Hare back in 2019 by Julia and Lydia. Rachel then joined. Rachel then joined in 2021 when their first show, Belly Up, was staged at the Turbine Theatre in Battersea. Belly Up, for anyone who wasn't lucky enough to see it, some people saw it. Belly Up is the story of a woman in the 18th century who, and these are Lydia's words, tries to shag her way out of being hanged for murder. Unlike Gunter, Belly Up wasn't based on a true story, but it was inspired by an 18th century legal convention. And much like Gunter, it featured lots of music and some really amazing performances as well. Their second show, Gunter, which you all had the privilege of seeing this evening, was first performed at the Edinburgh Fringe last summer, and people really loved it, didn't they? They absolutely loved it. You were awarded the Scotsman's Fringe First Award, Playbill's Pick of the Fringe, Lingardner's Pick of the Fringe, and you were also named one of the stage's top 5 breakthrough theatre makers. So it's safe to say it did pretty well. And you opened here at the Royal Court a week ago today. Congratulations. And here we are, which is so exciting. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves and say a bit about your role in making Gunter. And maybe we start with Jules and then go down the line.
I am one of the co-creators and I'm one of the actors in Gunter. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Lydia. I'm one of the co-creators and performers, historian, not an actor. I've obviously said that, draw that quite hard, but yeah, in Gunter.
I'm Rachel and I'm one of the co-creators and the director of Gunter.
I'm Nora and I'm one of the actors, and I came on in like the R&Ds, so like developed it from that stage.
I'm Hannah and I am an actor in Gunter.
And helped us make quite a lot of it.
You made quite a lot of it.
An actor.
And I feel like we're going to come back to that a lot, and we're going to have a lot of conversation about who was involved and how it was all made. But first, I'm going to come to Lydia, because it was you that discovered the story of Anne and Brian Gunter. Can you tell us a bit about how you discovered it and why it stood out to you as a story?
Yeah, so I first read Anne's story during my undergrad, in my first year. There's basically one amazing historian called Jim Sharp who uncovered her case in the 90s and wrote this sort of the classic text on her story, The Bewitching of Anne Gunter. And I read that in my first year and I just thought it was an absolute rip-roar of a story. I think like the thing about studying early modern witchcraft is that it's something that feels very kind of distant and far away. This is a kind of worldview that feels very, different from ours, and you're trying to be empathetic, but ultimately you can't believe that someone would try and persecute a witch. But there was something about this story that felt very kind of uncanny and familiar, and I recognised Brian Gunter and the kind of the motivations that sort of drove him, and I couldn't believe that he got it to the point that he did. I mean, meeting the King of England, it's just absolutely mental. You don't hear of that. And so yeah, read it ages ago, but definitely didn't think it was stageable, and was just a good pub story for a while. And then it all got a bit serious about a year ago. So yeah.
That segues actually really nicely into my next question, which is for Rachel, which is what makes this story such a great one for theatre? Like, why is this so stageable? Why does this story lend itself so well to theatre as a medium?
I mean, Lydia told me that story on a car trip, and she was kind of talking about these images of, and this swallowing pins thing and levitation and all of these really kind of visual images. And I think also I was at a time of like, I mean, it's a very British thing to start with the text, and I was feeling quite, I guess, a little bit bored in that respect. And I was, hearing all of these very visual images, I started to feel like they were just inherently very theatrical. And then also because, like, she performs possession, right? So, like, if we have an audience and then we can cast them as the men who she performs for, then I don't know, it is kind of a spectacle and it's performative. Like, what she's doing is performative. And there was also a quote, last thing is there was a quote from this historian that said, in this story, Anne was the actor and her dad, Brian Gunter, acted as the stage manager. And I was like, that's so... So then we started, he was kind of conducting this thing and moving stuff.
How much is written about the stuff that she was performing?
I mean, there's basically, there's essentially the Star Chamber case, which contains testimonies from the villagers that witnessed her in the kind of first instance, and then the people who testified in the Abingdon case, so the Oxford Dons and the physicians, etc. So there's quite a lot of, in fact, Anne's case is actually, crazily, one of the best documented in English witchcraft history because of the level of profile it received, and so and lots of literate, educated, important people became, sort of collapsed into the case as well. So there's quite a lot of material on what was actually happening to her, and this kind of goes on and on and on. And obviously we couldn't do it all, but. We had a good go. Points for trying.
There was a time when we were trying to buy a levitation table and it just got too far. It was like
heavy for budget as well.
And I was like, no, Nora, just get that bucket and put it out.
At one point I had you on my back. And I was like, my knees are not going to happen.
Oh my God, the cockroach lid.
Yeah, we need to make her fly. Yeah.
I was like, I can't hold you.
We'll come back in a bit to the history and the way that you made use of the original material, but I'm going to come to Jules now. And obviously when you are not making work with Dirty Hare, you're a writer in a much more traditional sense.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to know how the writing process was in general, and also how it was for you as someone that's maybe less used to a devising process like that.
Totally, very good question, Daisy. So, I mean, to be honest, it was absolutely harrowing, because I guess it's useful to talk about how we started writing the project. Me, Lydia and Rachel got in a room at Wildcard Studios, which is now a closed down space. It was an amazing space for artists. And we literally went in on any archives or books we could find about Anne Gunter's case. And we pulled as much of the truthful story beats out of it. And on Post-it notes, we basically mapped out, okay, there's 50 Thomases in the story. There's like this random woman called Alice who like ends up being a one-liner in the court song. It's a huge story. So the condensing of it and understanding the history of it felt like a really, really critical starting point. Then when we started, I suppose, like devising it and getting in a room, and we started pulling actors in, one of the actors, Letty Thomas, was in the early development alongside Nora. Then began my fear, because I do just sit on my own for like 8 hours a day. I'm obsessed with words and poetry and like the more like traditional playwriting in a way which was like really wild and like explosive. And the work that we love seeing is cabaret and is like European theatre and work that is like, whoa. But I'd never thought that I'd ever be part of that. So I just think these two are absolutely phenomenal, and they're such a safe pair of hands to work with. And they just gently were like, it's okay, come with us. And it was beautiful. We were able to shed any of our, we all come with a different toolkit to the project. And, Hannah came on a bit later in it, but still we work where it's necessary to probably have quite a traditional play, right? And then to have more like, so it's like it's like cooking a sort of,
Send it
you
home.
know, send it home. Come on, it's cooking a buffet. Yeah, but no, it was scary at the start.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Nora and Hannah now and ask for your take on the process. What was the devising process like? Maybe we'll start with Nora because you came on in that first initial R&D, and then Hannah. What was the process like, and what's unique about working with Dirty Hare in this way?
So me and Rachel would have spent a lot of many years, many conversations about sort of like how plays are made and rehearsal rooms and processes and stuff, and kind of just nerding out on that, having also been sort of frustrated and bored in rooms where it's like there's so much creative potential in this room, but we're just fulfilling an idea of how a play should be staged. And so we're all kind of going through these motions of like the hierarchy of the rehearsal room, and the, you know, week 1 is table work, week 2 is there's all of this like sort of notion of how, without, I think because of time and pressure and people being really scared to sort of shake that in any way, and we talked about what a different room would look like, and Rachel often talks about sort of creating the conditions with which brilliant stuff can happen, because I always find as an actor, like, there's a really fine line between you know, it being like really prescriptive and sort of the old-fashioned way of like stand here, do this, and then equally I think a sort of popular misconception at the moment that's like where there's no rules and there's no nothing, and like go fly, make art, and actually as an actor that makes you feel terrified and like you're drowning and there's nothing to like sort of hold on to. So what was unique about this process was that like I came into an R&D, but these guys had done so much work on like creating a structure that wasn't already the text and we were just rehearsing scenes, but it was like, these are the story beats, these are the sections, let's make something within this section. And the best bit about it was like the disclaimer was most of it's going to be shit. So get that out of your head already, that it has to be good. And that was just so liberating straight away, that it was like there's sort of like no right answer and all of the right answers, which was just really great. And every time we'd come and develop stuff, these guys would go away and like sort of do all the like alchemy with it and then come back into the room and then like it was just this constant sort of like process of that, which was just a dream. And it just makes it so freeing, and like you feel so empowered as an actor in the room, which is great.
Yeah, I didn't actually know anybody in this room, like, and I had an opportunity to work with them. Somebody got in touch, can't remember who it was, and I had a Zoom, and I was in Blackpool seeing a show, and so I was in this silly little Airbnb, and I had the Zoom with Rachel, and yeah, as Noel said, it was just there was no script, there was just like a document of like what their plan was, and I was like. Well, first of all, the story was so strong that I thought, well, that could be amazing. And then the second thing was just how clear that Dirty Hare had sort of, presented it to me in an incredibly accessible way, because I'm not, I find I was terrible at history at school and I wasn't engaged with it at all. And I love acting because you get to learn so much about different periods in time, and you do it by physically being in it, and that is like the most exciting thing ever. So to do this 16th century witch thing, and for it to be laid out in such an accessible way, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. Whereas if you'd read a bio about it or something like that, and would you like to be in my play and blah blah blah, I'd be like, nah. So it was amazing. And then we had this lovely Zoom, and I just got a really good vibe and feeling about it, and then so I turned up on day one and was like, hiya, and it was just fantastic. And I think the best thing about working with Dirty Hare is just, as Naz has said, like to be playful in a room and to feel like you can fully give your skills as an actor and feel confident about that and not judged, is there has to be a nice, careful atmosphere, and it has to be setting up the conditions to play. is I've done a play recently where I was supposed to be just have fun with it, just play. And it's like, but you have to set the conditions for that. Like, you know, your own actors are only really as good as their script and their team and it's a complete, you know, team effort. So the responsibility is all shared around in Dirty Hare, and no one everyone's got their place. And that's why I loved working with Rachel particularly, just because she held us so well. So yeah, if you get a chance to work with Dirty Hare, you should.
Oh my goodness. Very nice, hey? Okay, Lyd, I'm coming back to you to chat a bit about the music, because obviously it's a massive part of the show, and it's a huge part of the way that you guys tell stories. And I'd love to hear a bit from you about how you understand the role of music in Gunter and how you've used it.
I think we were sort of chatting about this earlier, weren't we? I think of music in theatre. I was about to say, like, I've got some grand things to say about my hot take on music. I actually don't have a hot take. It's just what I think. It's such a good problem-solving tool. Like, if you can obviously play music, then it's just such a great way of, like, dealing with not necessarily problems, but stuff that, like, for example, a court scene. You know, it's a kind of 17th century witch trial court scene. Okay, you know, that's been done quite a few times. It's potential. You're at a point in the play where you could really kill it or lose your audience. Like, how do we do this in a way that's fun, I guess, and is kind of engaging? Or like Elizabeth's denouncement, where she goes out into the village and is like, Brian Gunter's a fucking bastard, rah, rah. There's one way of doing that, but there's also like a blues version way of doing it, which is like, you know, it just provides a kind of extra flavour. And so, yeah, I think the music, and actually I think in the early stages, the music was something that was able to hold a lot of the kind of other messy stuff, right? Because we like had these things that we were gonna hit, you know? Yeah. I think also in a way, like, because of the decision for Anne to not speak throughout the show, I think the music is a lovely way for us to communicate in a way, have our moments, and like that she has these set melodies, and that I mean, obviously, is my role in the show is to talk about the construction and to try and, you know, help construct this story, and the music is a part of that, and it's a way of kind of reaching her and her, you know. That's how I think. I don't know. Maybe you think
it's like a beautiful different character in this story, that you can like completely undercut a scene, what's going on, with like the inner, like guttural thing of what's going on in someone else. It's like a focus puller. It's like amazing. But I was just gonna say, what Hannah was saying about when Hannah came on board and she didn't know anyone, and we were all kind of like in this chaotic story. There was one moment where we all sang in harmony together, and we've all got like quite different voices, but it just worked, and we were all a bit like, because that's sort of like chance. I don't know, that's something like more than sort of casting and whatever. It's just like something happened, and I think that's also a testament to just like the purity of what Liz has composed, and just like that being our like carrier all the way through, that actually when the three of us just use our voices at the same time, it's like all the other kind of stuff is like so like steely, straight through it.
Also, a historian who gets a guitar out, like, you can't not, you gotta do it. That happens. The electric guitar. Great. I know.
That is actually the perfect link into what I wanted to ask next, which is about the history. And obviously, as we now all know in this room, it's based on a true story. Anne and Brian were real people, and that there's quite a lot of pressure, I suppose, when you're telling a real story, especially a story like Anne's that has been so, at least Anne's side of the story has been so poorly documented. And I'm interested to know how you held the history throughout the process, the way in which you used the sources, and that you kind of used the history of it to create what we've just seen.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the first thing was that Lydia told me the story, and I was a non-negotiable for me was that Lydia was going to frame the thing. And I think, that felt very important to me, that Lydia was going to frame it, much to her detriment, because she doesn't particularly love being on stage. So it felt important to me that Lydia was framing it. And then I think also a very useful discovery for us was to to use the problem being like the gaps in the archive. There was a point where it had 4 endings and we were really lost. And I think when we realised that you could use the problem as the solution, the problem being like the gap in the archive and what you do with that, and rather than trying to ignore it in the show, like bring it into the show, that felt like a massive opening for us. Use the problem as a solution. Someone once said that to me and I was like, oh my god, guys, I've got it. You've got to use the problem.
Got a pithy sort of statement.
I don't know, do you have anything else about history, the way you use history?
I mean, I think that it's very clear when you're watching it that it has a kind of historical veracity to it because we have, you know, pulled this true story. But there's a point at which you kind of have to let go of that a bit as well and be like, this is also a theatre show. We are taking history and we're like kind of exploding it. But I think you probably have to do that from a place of knowledge and knowing and understanding what you're kind of messing with in order to do that with kind of care and, you know, this kind of like weird distant respect for people that have, you know, that actually had this lived experience as well. So, you know, it's about being committed but not too stringent as well, and like giving yourself a bit of a break that it's historical but it's also totally theatre and it's music and there's so much skill and talent in the room that it's like, you know, history is a part of it.
So I was just going to add on to Lydia sent us a podcast the other day that was Hilary Mantel.
Yeah, Hilary Mantel.
And she quoted someone, and I don't want to misquote it, but it's exactly what Lydia's just saying. They said something like, fiction has to fire the imagination before history can fire the reason or something. But they're not mutually exclusive. Like, we're humans, and like understanding these humans on a like human level. Like, that's the job of fiction. I don't know how to get really to the crux of it, but I just think that speaks really well to what you were just saying.
We're going to come to some questions from you. So if anyone, we have about 5 minutes, and I'd love to hear what you'd like to know from the company. So does anyone have any questions? Straight up, yes.
I was wondering, how did it go from being in Edinburgh Fringe last summer to being at a Royal Court Theatre? What was that process like, and did it come as almost a surprise, or was it like...
Do you want to
Yeah, okay. So we, when we were going up to Edinburgh, we promised ourselves that we would just make something without thinking of the future of it, because we have been for years stuck in this bloody industry that you never get a reply to an email. It's so hard to make work, and we've been trying to make work for years. So we were like, right, let's just focus on getting a play up that we can control and have autonomy over. So it is a shock to be here, because that's beyond our wildest dreams to have a play here. But the way it happened quite practically was the Royal Court came to see it. I think Edinburgh does bring in quite a few venues. They come and we were at Summer Hall, which is quite good for footfall in terms of like people coming in. And we got a lovely email from Rebecca, who used to be the executive producer, director of the Royal Court. She said, come in and let's talk about the play. You know, it was that time where there was the exchange of artistic directors and there was movement in the Royal Court. So it feels like a very exciting time for us to be here. That was ridiculously lovely that this has happened, because we've had years of that not happening.
I'm just going to repeat the question for the sake of these microphones and the recording, if that's okay. So it was a question about all of the different technical elements that you use in the show, and whether you had those in mind before you went into the rehearsal room, or whether you got in and you were like, oh, maybe we could use shadows and maybe we could use this. How did that work?
I mean, we're still doing it on the day.
I think there were some fundamental like non-negotiables, like her not speaking, like there being 3 actors, like Lydia framing the action, which kind of led to there being titles. That was always, so some things were there from the beginning, and then I was trying not to generally like sit on my own and work it out. I was trying to like come in, have lots of fun things to play with, and just be like, oh, that's fun, could do. What should we do with that?
What about balloons?
What about balloons? So I think a lot of it, like, I wasn't just totally going on a whim. I had I was nudging us towards somewhere that I thought could be good. But other technical elements, I mean, we were allowed to push it quite far because you've got a grounding person in it. It meant that we could go quite far in kind of storytelling directions.
But the light journey was quite a good finding, right? In
the light journey was only because the light Daniel from Amy Daniels. The lights were only because there's someone who don't really have a lighting rig, and Amy said, right, we're not going to have much tech time, let's just buy 3 20-quid lights, and so they could be in control of them and focus it. So that was came purely from practicality. A lot of it came from having no money and being like, what can I, when we took it to Edinburgh, we had only us 5 plus Amy Daniels who lit it.
Rachel up the show. So
I
learning how to use.
I was learning how to use QLab like this. God, it was really, really scary. So a lot of it came out of necessity, I think. And we missed our tech. So So
after all that,
it was all quite surprising. We're like this.
Also, just the privilege of having research and development weeks on a project is because that's when you get to play with that stuff and be like, is there any potential in this, without the pressure of the rehearsal weeks and the things looming and whatever, to get all of that trial and error and creativity out in that is like a joy. It's always a joy, isn't it?
I'm going to just repeat the question very quickly,
Yes.
which was about the character Thomas Hinton and whether he had a real sense of what was going on in terms of the patriarchy at play, or whether he was just cynical about witchcraft, or whether there was something else.
Yeah. Shall I go? So I think in the first, Thomas Hinton's an interesting character because I think he's got a personal investment in the case, which we don't really have time to go into in the story, but basically he was a family relation of basically a family that a similar case a similar story had happened to basically in the 1580s, called the Throckmorton case, and he was kind of involved in it. And it was like this creepy mass possession case of these kids, and the woman who was accused of bewitching them was in fact executed. And we have the Alice Samuel reference in the story, and Brian Gunter actually read this pamphlet, and that was where he basically derived all of his ideas about the blueprint of how to kind of feign possession came from that. So Thomas Hinton, I would have had an inside kind of knowledge of that. I think that in the period there are a range of opinions about how possession and exorcism, bewitchment actually operates, and witchcraft as well. There are skeptics in the early modern period who don't think that witches can fly, who think that's ridiculous, or who believe that bewitchment and exorcism is just kind of Catholic superstition. And so at that time, there were Protestants, quite serious skeptic Protestants, who really saw it as a part of, morally regulating society so that we don't slip into chaos, that they should actually intervene in cases where people are just, causing shit amongst neighbours and trying to get people bewitched. I mean, that's, to Thomas Hinton, that's anarchy, So I think he's got this kind of, this personal investment and understanding, but I think he also has, it's less about him seeing Brian Gunter as a patriarch, and I think it's really more about him seeing him as somebody that's morally slippery, and kind of, basically dodgy and superstitious. So that's my probably understanding of that. Yeah,
Jesus,
but he's an
yeah,
interesting
that's
character.
God, I've been playing him wrong.
I'm glad we finally had this discussion. So about that,
And also in preview one, we tried to say all of that, and it was just so
Too
dark. We were
much.
like,
Oh
God, we're losing them. We're just gonna have to cut it all.
Yeah.
He's just here.
So there's a kind of 2-hour version of this play with the whole Thomas Hinton act. But really interesting question, definitely.
As a kind of quick wrap up, what can we expect next from Dirty Hare?
Wouldn't you like to know? No, we are developing a new musical with a cool theatre. And we're still out there hunting opportunities. We're single and flirty. We are just basically dedicated to just making new work as much as we can, I think, and basically keeping a head above the water. Hate myself.
Sorry. Amazing. Okay. I think that might be all we've got time for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you,
Thank you
guys.
so much for